My daughter wants her biological father to walk her down the aisle instead of my husband, who has always been there for her. But if he's not part of the wedding, neither is his money. Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm married to the most incredible man, James. Not only is he an amazing husband, but he's also an incredible stepfather to my daughter, Emily. James came into our lives when Emily was just 5 years old. Her biological father, Tom, left us when she was a baby and has only been sporadically present since then, without really taking on the role of a father. When James came into our lives, it felt like a breath of fresh air. From the beginning, he treated Emily as if she were his own daughter. I remember when we started dating, he would bring her little gifts, not anything extravagant, just thoughtful things like a book or a cute stuffed animal. It was clear he was trying to connect with her, and it worked. Emily grew very attached to him quite quickly. One thing that really stands out is how James supported Emily's love for ballet. She started taking classes when she was 6, and James never missed a single recital. He was always there, cheering her on, sometimes even tearing up a little. He made sure she had everything she needed: ballet slippers, beautiful tutus, and even extra classes with a private tutor when she had an important performance coming up. When Emily was about 9, she had a big performance, and she was very nervous. The day before, James took her to the park, and they spent hours talking and practicing her routine. They even made up a silly chant to help calm her nerves. That night, he stayed up late with her, going over her steps until she felt confident. The next day, she nailed the performance, and I know it was because James was right there with her. But it's not just the big moments. James has always been there for the little things, too. When Emily struggled with math in high school, he would sit with her every night after work, helping her with her homework. Sometimes, they would sit at the kitchen table for hours, and even though James was exhausted from work, he never showed it. He was always patient and never gave up on her. As amazing as James has been, there has always been a lingering sadness when it comes to Emily and her biological father, Tom. There were times when she would ask about him, wondering why he wasn't around, and it broke my heart to see her like that. I remember one Father's Day when Emily made 2 cards, one for James and one for Tom. She asked if she could send the card to Tom, and of course, I said yes. She never got a response. The disappointment in her eyes felt like a punch to the gut. James has always been so understanding about it. He never tried to replace Tom but made it clear he was there for Emily no matter what. When Emily turned 13, she received a letter from Tom apologizing for his absence. She was so happy at first, but then weeks turned into months, and she never heard from him again. The pain in her eyes was unbearable. James became even more present during those times, always assuring her that she was loved and important. One Christmas, Emily was very down. She had been hoping Tom would reach out during the holidays, but when he didn't, she fell into a funk. James noticed and went out of his way to cheer her up. He planned an elaborate Christmas treasure hunt around the house, with little notes and gifts hidden everywhere. By the end, Emily was laughing and smiling again, and that's just James, always thinking of others, always putting Emily first. When Emily graduated from high school, James was the one who cried the most. He gave a heartfelt speech at her graduation party about how proud he was of her and how much he admired her strength. It was so emotional that even Emily, who is usually very composed, couldn't hold back her tears. James made sure she had everything she needed for college, even setting up a fund so she wouldn't have to worry about student loans. About a year ago, Emily announced her engagement to her longtime boyfriend Mark, and it was a moment I'll never forget. We were all gathered for a family dinner at our house, one of those rare evenings when everyone was free. Emily and Mark had been together for years, and we all adored him, so this was the natural next step. Emily waited until dessert to make her announcement. She stood up, looking both nervous and excited, and said, "Everyone, I have some news." Then she held up her hand, and there it was, a beautiful ring sparkling on her finger, which she had been hiding in her pocket so we wouldn't notice. "Mark and I are getting married," she said. James jumped out of his chair, overjoyed for Emily. He hugged her so tightly I thought she might pop. The pride and happiness radiating from him were undeniable. He was the first to offer to pay for the wedding. "We want to give you the best day possible," he said, looking at Emily and Mark. "Nothing but the best for our girl." Emily was over the moon and thanked him endlessly, hugging him again and again. Since then, James has been fully involved in the wedding planning. He's been excited about every detail, wanting everything to be perfect for Emily's big day. We visited countless venues, sampled a ridiculous number of cakes, and attended endless meetings with florists and decorators. James has been there every step of the way, offering suggestions but always making sure Emily's vision came first. A few months ago, Emily started reconnecting with her biological father, Tom. It came out of nowhere. Suddenly, Tom wanted to be involved in her life now that she was getting married. I was skeptical given his history, but Emily was thrilled. She had always wanted a relationship with him, so I understood why she was giving him a chance. At first, it seemed fine. Emily was happy, and it was nice to see her smiling about something that had caused her so much pain in the past. But then her attitude toward James began to change. It was subtle at first, forgetting to invite him to important planning meetings or dismissing his suggestions, things she used to value deeply. James noticed too, but he didn't say anything. He's always been the patient and understanding type. One night during dinner, Emily was talking about some new ideas Tom had for the wedding. James offered a suggestion, and Emily cut him off mid-sentence, saying, "Tom and I already decided on this, James." The look on James's face was heartbreaking. He just nodded and stayed quiet for the rest of the meal. There were other signs too. Emily used to ask James for help with things like fixing her car or managing her finances, but now she mentioned that Tom was taking care of those things. I could see James looking a bit lost, like he wasn't sure where he fit in anymore. He never complained, but I could tell it was affecting him. I decided to talk to Emily about it one morning over coffee. I mentioned how she seemed a bit distant with James lately. "Emily, sweetheart, I've noticed you've been a bit distant with James lately. Is everything okay?" She looked a bit surprised and annoyed. "Mom, you're overreacting. I'm just busy with the wedding and reconnecting with Tom. It's a lot to handle." I didn't want to push too hard, but I couldn't just let it go. "I understand, but James loves you so much. He's done everything to make sure your wedding is perfect. I just feel like he's being sidelined." Emily said she appreciated everything James had done, but insisted that Tom was her real father and that she wanted to give him a chance to be part of this. Her words hurt me. I understood that she wanted to connect with Tom, but I also knew how much James had given to her and how deeply he loved her as if she were his own daughter. I told her I understood, but that I didn't want James to feel pushed aside. Emily dismissed it, saying she wasn't sidelining him, just trying to balance things now that Tom was back. Things didn't improve after that conversation. If anything, they got worse. Emily started calling Tom Dad in front of James, something she had never done before. The first time it happened was when we were discussing seating arrangements for the reception. She looked at Tom and said, "Dad, what do you think about this?" James flinched a little, but I noticed. He excused himself shortly after, saying he had work to finish. I tried to talk to James about it, but he brushed it off, saying he was happy that Emily was reconnecting with her father, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He had spent years being the father Tom never was, and now he felt like he was being sidelined. Emily started spending more and more time with Tom, going out for lunches, having long phone calls, and updating him on every little detail of the wedding. James was still there, helping and supporting, but it felt like he was becoming a background character in a story where he used to be the hero. About a week ago, during a family dinner, Emily dropped a bombshell that took us all by surprise. We were sitting around the table, enjoying a nice meal, when Emily cleared her throat and said she had something important to discuss. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach, but I tried to listen. She began, looking at Mark, and then at Tom, who had joined us for dinner. "I've been thinking a lot about the wedding, and the roles everyone will play. I've decided I want Tom to have a significant role in the ceremony." We all knew this might happen, but hearing it out loud was something else entirely. Emily continued talking, completely unaware of the tension that had just filled the room. "I want my real father to walk me down the aisle," she said. "I think it's only fair that Tom, my biological father, gets this special role." James looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He took a deep breath and nodded, his voice steady but soft. "If that's what you want, Emily, I'll support your decision." It was heartbreaking. Months ago, Emily had asked James to walk her down the aisle, and she had been so excited about it, practically jumping for joy. I remember her saying she couldn't imagine anyone else walking her down the aisle because James had always been there for her. He was thrilled, but now things were different. Emily was caught up in the idea of her real father having this big role and couldn't see how much she was hurting the man who had always been her father in every way that mattered. I couldn't just sit there, so I said, "Emily, do you realize what you're doing? James has been there for everything. He's the one who raised you and always supported you." She replied, "Mom, I understand, but this is important to me. I want Tom to be part of my wedding. He's my biological father." I looked at James, who was doing his best to keep his emotions in check. "Emily," I said softly, "I understand you want to include Tom, but this is a big change. Just think about how much this means, not just to you, but to everyone involved." She was clearly frustrated. "I've already made my decision. Tom's my dad and he should walk me down the aisle. End of discussion." After that, dinner continued in awkward silence. After much thought and heartache, I finally decided to talk to Emily about the situation. I felt like I had to draw a line somewhere. I told Emily that if James wasn't going to be considered a father in this wedding, if his role was going to be replaced by Tom's, then we needed to reconsider his financial support as well. I made it clear that the money James had invested in this wedding wasn't just a financial contribution. It was an act of love and paternal support. If he wasn't going to walk her down the aisle, then it seemed fair to rethink his involvement. I know that might sound harsh, but I felt torn. James had been more than a stepfather to Emily, and now he was being pushed aside, which felt like a betrayal to see him ignored in favor of Tom, who had been mostly absent from Emily's life. When I first brought this up, James tried to talk me out of it. He didn't want to make things worse or cause more conflict. He always puts Emily's happiness first, even if it means quietly enduring his own pain. He told me we should focus on making her happy, no matter how much it hurt him, but I couldn't just sit by and watch anymore. Every day, I saw how much this was affecting James. I wanted Emily to understand what she was really doing. Not just the symbolic gestures, but the real, tangible ways James had been a father to her. Despite James's protests, I went ahead and had the conversation with Emily. I made it clear that it wasn't about the money, it was about recognizing the role James had played in her life. When I told her this, I never expected her to explode the way she did. Emily's reaction was intense and honestly, very hurtful. She became extremely upset, accusing James of using his money to control and manipulate her wedding plans. It was shocking to see her go from being a loving daughter to feeling cornered and betrayed so quickly. The next thing I knew, Emily started spreading rumors among our family and friends, portraying James as some kind of villain. She claimed that he was using his financial support to dictate how the wedding should go. This created a huge rift in the family. People started taking sides, and the divide was stark. Some sympathized with Emily's desire to include Tom, while others felt that James was being treated unfairly. I found myself stuck in the middle, trying to defend James while also trying to maintain peace amid all the chaos. I asked Emily why she didn't ask Tom to help pay for the wedding if he was suddenly so important to her. I thought it was a fair question, especially since Tom had become such a big part of the wedding plans. Emily told me she had asked, but he said he didn't have any money saved for something like that. After much reflection, James made the difficult decision to step back entirely. He decided he couldn't continue being involved in the wedding emotionally or financially. It was his way of protecting himself from further pain and making a statement about how deeply he had been hurt. It wasn't an easy choice, but he felt it was the only way to maintain his dignity and sanity. The impact of James' decision was immediate and huge. Without his financial support, the wedding preparations turned into chaos. Emily had been counting on James's contributions to cover a significant portion of the costs. Now, with that funding gone, she had to scramble to figure out how to make up the difference. In the end, Emily had to scale back the wedding significantly. The beautiful venue she had dreamed of was the first thing to go. She had to settle for a much simpler location. Some things were already paid for, including her dress, so at least that remained intact amid the chaos. As the wedding day approached, it became clear that James and I would not be attending. A few days after the wedding, Emily called us. That conversation was one of the hardest I've ever had. She told us we had ruined her wedding because of our decision to withdraw financial support. Now, some of our family members are siding with Emily, saying we should have gone along with what she wanted to keep the peace. They believe James and I overreacted, and that family should always come first, no matter the circumstances. It's hard to feel misunderstood and unsupported by people who should know the full story. I'm posting this on Reddit because I need an impartial opinion. Was I in the right in this situation, or should we have paid for the wedding? Update 1. Thank you for taking the time to comment. After reading your opinions, I truly believe we did the right thing. It's been a few months since the wedding, and I wish I could say things have improved, but unfortunately, they haven't. Emily still isn't speaking to James or me. It's as if she's completely erased us from her life, and honestly, it's heartbreaking. I've tried reaching out to her several times, hoping we could have a calm conversation and resolve everything, but she doesn't want to hear from us. To be frank, Emily is acting like a spoiled child. I know that sounds harsh, but I'm at my limit. She's behaving like a brat who didn't get what she wanted, and instead of trying to understand our perspective, she's clinging to her stance and denying how much she's hurt James. Every time I think about this, I feel a mix of sadness and frustration. I understand that reconnecting with her biological father was important to Emily, but I can't understand how she dismissed everything James has done for her so quickly. It's like she's forgotten all the sacrifices he made, all the times he was there for her when Tom wasn't even in the picture. And now, because she didn't get her way, she's throwing a tantrum and shutting us out of her life. What's even more frustrating is how she's assuming the role of the victim to anyone who will listen. I've heard from some family members that Emily has been spreading her version of the story, painting us in the worst possible light. Some of our relatives are even starting to believe her side of things, which only complicates matters further. I didn't want to believe Emily could be so selfish, But here we are. She's always been a bit stubborn, but this level of entitlement is something entirely different. It's as if she expects the world to revolve around her, and when it doesn't, she gets angry and refuses to take responsibility for her actions. I'm sorry for venting, but I've never been so frustrated before, and this has given me a way to release all my feelings. Update 2. It's been a few months since my last update, and things have taken a rather unexpected turn. I'm not sure how to feel about what's happening, so I thought I'd come here for some advice. Last weekend, Emily showed up at our house out of the blue. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect, given how distant and cold she's been since the wedding. When she appeared at the door, I was surprised, but I let her in because, well, she's still my daughter despite everything that's happened. Once we sat down, Emily told me that she and Mark were in serious financial trouble. Apparently, she went way over budget on the wedding, maxed out her credit cards, and now debt collectors are calling her constantly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We all knew the wedding was expensive, even after they had to cut back on some things, but I had no idea she was stretching herself this thin. I asked her how on earth she could let this happen, especially when she knew her financial limits. That's when she dropped the bombshell that it was our fault. She said she had been counting on our help with the wedding, and when we pulled out, we left her in a desperate situation. My jaw practically hit the floor. Our fault? After everything that happened, after she sidelined James and said those horrible things about him, it was hard not to lose my temper in that moment. James wasn't home at the time, so it was just Emily and me. I took a deep breath and asked her, "Why don't you ask your dear dad Tom for money?" I know it was a bit sarcastic, but I couldn't help it. She looked down and admitted that she already had, and unsurprisingly, Tom refused. I shouldn't be shocked, part of me saw this coming from a mile away. Then she started begging. She said she had nowhere else to turn and even offered that it would just be a small loan that she'd pay back. I could see the desperation in her eyes and it broke my heart a little. Despite everything, she's still my child, and seeing her like this was hard, but at the same time, I couldn't just forget everything that had happened. I told her a lot had happened, especially with her accusations, and that I needed time to think about it. She looked disappointed but agreed and left. Now I'm in this horrible position where I have to decide what to do next. Part of me is worried about telling James. I know he'd jump at the chance to help Emily, because not contributing to her wedding has been eating away at him. Even though he stepped back, I know it's been hard for him, and I can see that he's still hurt by the whole ordeal. But another part of me feels like helping Emily now would just enable her behavior. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. She can't just come running to us every time she's in trouble, especially after the way she treated us. What do you all think? Should I tell James about Emily's request? Should we help her, or is it time for some tough love? Any advice or perspective would be really helpful right now. Thank you in advance. Update 3. I wanted to share with you what has happened recently, as even I didn't expect this. After my last update, I spent a lot of time thinking about Emily's request and how to handle the situation. I knew I had to talk to James about Emily's visit and her request for money, but I also knew it would be a difficult conversation. James has been incredibly strong and patient throughout all of this, but the wounds Emily caused him are still fresh, and I wasn't sure how he would react. Finally, one evening after dinner, I mustered up the courage to tell James about Emily's visit and her request for money. To be honest, I was worried about how he would take it, especially because I know how much he loves Emily despite everything that's happened. As I spoke, I watched his face, expecting to see that spark of concern and paternal love he always has when it comes to her. However, what I saw this time was different. James remained silent, processing everything I had told him, and then, in a calm voice, he said something I didn't expect. "I can't do it." I stayed quiet for a moment before reacting. "What do you mean you can't do it?" James, with a hint of sadness, told me, "There's only so much pain a father can bear. Even though I'm not her biological father, I've always seen her as my daughter. But now, after everything that's happened, I simply can't just hand her the money. I can't keep being the emotional and financial support while she continues to push me aside and treat me like a stranger in her life. This has been too painful, and I'm not sure how much more I can take." I felt a lump in my throat as I listened to James. I knew how much this was costing him, and seeing him reach this point of emotional exhaustion confirmed just how deeply he'd been hurt by all of this. He wasn't being cruel or vindictive, he was simply protecting himself from further pain. The next day, after giving it a lot of thought, I called Emily to give her the news. Before telling her, I asked how much money she needed to get out of debt. The amount she mentioned left me speechless. That's no small sum, and considering that much of her debt was due to luxuries, it only made the situation worse. "Emily," I told her, "I spoke with James, and we won't be able to lend you the money. This isn't easy for us, but there are limits to what we can endure, especially after what happened. It's not that we don't want to help you, but he's deeply hurt, and we can't ignore that." There was silence on the other end of the line before Emily asked, with a tone of desperation, "So what am I supposed to do now? Tom isn't exactly in my life right now." I asked what she meant by Tom not being in her life, and Emily, after a moment of hesitation, explained that ever since she asked him for financial help, Tom had been avoiding her calls. He barely responded to her messages and, in general, had disappeared from her life again. But the fact that Tom wasn't meeting Emily's expectations didn't surprise me at all. After all, he'd been absent for most of her life, and now that things had gotten complicated, he seemed to have reverted to his old behavior patterns. Emily tried to justify it, saying maybe he was busy or didn't know how to handle the situation, but to me it was clear that Tom wasn't the support she had hoped he would be. It's ironic that now she not only has a significant debt to remind her of the wedding negatively for a long time, but she also likely has many wedding photos with her biological father, who has abandoned her again. If that isn't karma, then I don't know what is. Update 4. I have an update about my life and Emily, so I'm back after 3 months just to write this. It all happened a couple of days ago. It was a quiet afternoon at home. James and I were making dinner when we heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. We weren't expecting anyone, so neither of us made a move to answer the door at first, but James eventually stepped forward. When he opened it, what I saw was completely unexpected. There was Emily, standing on the doorstep. Behind her, her car was loaded with suitcases and boxes, as if she had hurriedly packed up her entire life and stuffed it into her car. James looked at her, surprised. Before he could say anything, Emily looked him straight in the eye and asked if she could stay at our house. I walked up to the door, sensing that something serious was happening. "What happened, Emily?" I asked, trying to understand the situation. Emily sighed deeply and lowered her gaze before responding. "I had a fight with Mark," she began. "Things have been hard between us, especially with all the money issues. I just couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to leave the house. I don't want to be there right now." Finally, James made a decision. He told Emily, "You can't stay here." Then he turned around and went back to the kitchen without saying anything else. I swear I've never seen this man so hurt in my life. Emily stood there, frozen in the doorway, clearly affected by James's response. I stayed with her at the door, watching as her eyes filled with tears. I knew I had to say something, so with all the calm I could muster, I explained, "Emily, I know this is hard, but James has made it clear that you can't stay here, and I respect his decision." Emily looked at me with a mix of desperation and surprise. "Mom, you don't have to listen to James. He's not even my biological father, but I'm your daughter. You should let me stay." Her words were a clear attempt to appeal to our connection, to that biological bond that, for her, should have carried more weight at that moment. But the truth is that, regardless of that, the situation had changed too much. "Emily," I responded firmly, "regardless of James's decision, I also believe it's not a good idea for you to stay here. There's too much pain and too many unresolved issues. I don't think it would be good for any of us right now." She tried to insist, begging me to let her stay, but I held my ground. I knew I had to be firm for the sake of all of us. Without saying much else, Emily turned around, got back into her car, and drove away. This has been one of the hardest moments we've had to face as a family, but I also know it was necessary. The wounds left between us can't heal overnight, and while it hurts to make these decisions, I know sometimes it's the only thing you can do to protect yourself and others. I haven't heard from her since, so I assume she's found somewhere else to stay, or gone back to Mark. It's tough as a mother, but I believe it was something that had to be done. I've talked to James, and we both agree that just because she's in trouble doesn't mean we're going to forget everything. I wish we hadn't reached this point, but sometimes life is more complicated than you'd like it to be.